Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Lawless, Manager of Digital Program at AVIXA, and welcome to the third part of the three-part series on Lean Six Sigma in AV. Today's webinar will concentrate on how to successfully deploy Lean Six Sigma for AV. And this material will be presented by Max Kopshow, who is a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt and professional service consultant at D-Tools and has over 30 years of in-depth experience with AV system design and install, networking, telecom, video and conferencing, and collaboration systems. Before I hand over the presentation to Max, there's just a few housekeeping items. For those viewing live, today's webinar qualifies for one CTS, CTSD, and one CTSI RU credit. Please allow 5 to 7 business days to view on your transcript, and for any issues, email webinars@avixa.org. The webinar will be about 45 to 60 minutes and all attendees will be placed on mute. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A window. Only so today's moderator can address them at the end of the webinar. To access the Q&A window, simply move your cursor to the bottom of the live stream video box and locate the Q&A icon and type away. And lastly, you'll have access to this recorded webinar as well as the 2 previous webinars at avixa.org/webinar. And now, Max, on over to you.
Great, thank you very much. I think I'm sharing my screen. I don't see the green border around that I normally see, so let me make sure that, can everybody see the title slide?
Looks
Or do
good
I
on
need
my
to share it
end.
again? How about now? Still not seeing it. Okay,
Yes.
so looks like everybody else is seeing it. I just don't have that green border I normally have. All right, welcome everybody and thank you. We'll just jump right in as Ali said that this is a 3-part series. And so the first part, when we first started this presentation, we started talking about what Lean Six Sigma is, and then some of the keys to Lean Six Sigma. So now we're just taking it to that next step of where it's going to work in your AV organization, or some tips and tricks on deploying it in your organization. It's all about process improvement. And so there's these, the world according to Max is part of this presentation. So I'm not going to stick directly to some of the things that are formally part of the Lean Six Sigma program. So the first thing that I'll mention that's part of the world according to Max is that it can be deployed in chunks. Okay, so it means that we use that analogy of eating the elephant, trying to take on that big task at once rather than one bite at a time really is one of the biggest keys to success. It's not one of the 5 that I talk about, so I'll talk about it up front, is deploying a change in the organization, a process improvement in small parts at the beginning to get those successes under your belt. That's probably the most important thing in this program, where now we can talk about some of the structured stuff behind Lean Six Sigma, and then know that you can implement it in pieces that fit your organization. I had a discussion just today about trying to deploy a process improvement, but also you're still running your business. And so it's, the analogy there is, you're building a plane while you're flying it. So you can't, stop anything and change your processes. They have to change a little bit at a time. And that's where the success comes from. So when we talk about the 5 steps to deploying Lean in AV, again, I'll just cover very quickly what Lean Six Sigma is. So Six Sigma is just talking about the number of standard deviations away from, the goal. And so in this case, or actually towards the goal, so that we have 6 standard deviations, which means that there will only be, if you were working in a production line, there would only be 3 defects per million of the products that you put out. So it's as close as we can get to perfection as we could ever hope. But that's not the expectation, is to have a perfect line. The idea is constant process improvement. It's an ongoing basis, so continuous process improvement. And then the other idea is what are our goals? So we're trying to reduce defects as the one, but then also just improvement in either your profits or employee morale or quality of the products or services, meaning that you're taking the voice of the customer and building a better product because of that. Then we also, talk about the DMAIC process. So define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And so those are what's in the previous sessions. And then we also talk about the 5 principles of lean. So it's Lean Six Sigma. And if you kind of looked at it from a perspective of the two being combined together, and this is a big overview, broad statement, but the Six Sigma part is all about the defining a process and a way to measure success and analyze how that's going. Those 5 portions of the DMAIC process, but it's really structured and it uses a lot of data, as well as lean. But lean is the part where you kind of the goal is to eliminate waste, which includes the wasted amount of time following a process. So Lean Six Sigma is all about process, or Six Sigma is, and lean is about reducing the process, but still keeping it to where you eliminate waste. So here we're actually, the idea is one, we're perfecting a production line, and 2 is we're adding value by either reducing the amount of time spent doing something, or ways to actually increase profits from those improvements from the lean side. And then again, it's a continuous process because it's a continuous process improvement, not just a one-time thing. The 5 S's, if you've ever been to an office that uses the Lean Six Sigma or Lean, you'll see that like the work areas are well sorted. Like there's labels on everything, and where you're supposed to walk, there's tape on the ground, those types of things. It's almost to the degree of being anal, but there's a purpose behind that, is because it increases the effectiveness or the productivity of the workers in that space, as well as the ability to be multi-disciplined and move from space to space and know where everything is and how that other person works, because everybody works with that same 5S mentality. The idea behind Lean Six Sigma in AV, using the define, measure, analyze, improve, control side, could be applied to the process of working on a project. The idea here is a switch from where Lean Six Sigma used to be part of the total quality management systems. And the idea was it will help you make a widget better, a product better. But truly, the Six Sigma can be used in a process. Your product happens to be the service that you provide a customer, or the process of sales that you put them through, or those types of things, but you still have a product and you can improve that. So this is the idea of applying the define, measure, analyze, improve, control to the phases of an AV project. So that's what we talked about before. And now the new stuff. So the first thing I'll also caution you, one is take it in small bits. Find a small thing in your organization that you can improve, and go through and practice the process of using a program like Lean Six Sigma, or a variation that you create for your own, that you adapt. So in the example here, I talk about Lean Six Sigma and applying that to the sales process. And a lot of people will jump on the way to improve sales is to use a CRM, or a way of capturing the data as far as the process is concerned in the sales process. So when are you moving suspects to prospects, and when are you moving those prospects to actual projects, and then the projects to close out, and tracking that throughout the process. The one cautionary tale, and this applies to any process that you put in place, is to make sure that you're not creating what I would refer to as a data pig, where the job of putting the data in so that management can view the process or the progress or any data points in there. The job of putting the data in actually becomes a burden on the workforce. So it should always be considered a tool, but are you giving them something that makes them more efficient, and actually they have input into that? I used the example last course about when we sell equipment and a system to a university, or a university deploys it within their own organization. And if the faculty hasn't had input into the system, you'll find very quickly that they don't adopt it the way you thought they could, because they didn't have the inputs. And so they work a little bit differently than the assumptions that were made of how they work. The same thing holds true here, where we're talking about what Six Sigma is not. It's not a tracking tool so that we can keep the management and executives at bay from making us work harder or bring in more or anything like that. The idea is that it naturally does create productivity and efficiencies because it was asked for by the team. So that this statement here shows the importance of having the actual end user, the voice of the customer, in the development of the process and the tools and techniques that are used. Same thing for the sales reporting here, where we're talking about it's, we want to look at forecasting and things like that. Again, it shouldn't be anything that is just a report for report's sake. We actually need, as salespeople, we need this data so that we can do our jobs better or address things quicker, and things like that. And it's not just a checklist. So a lot of people will believe that they're deploying a process improvement plan by just putting together a bunch of checklists that people have to follow. Standardization is great, but again, there has to be a lot of analysis done ahead of time as to whether those checklists are actually going to achieve anything. So that's what we'll talk about today, is a lot of that data. So start off with just talking about the 5 keys to successfully deploying Lean Six Sigma in AV. The first of which would be, you have to make the decision to improve something. And then when you do, make the decision on how you're going to approach that. Are we going to adopt a program that reduces the number of processes, but still improves a program to near perfection, or the goal being continuous improvement towards perfection? And what are we targeting? What is the process that we want to target? So that decision is kind of made up front. Now later, we'll put together a team of people who that team may analyze and determine that the process we chose isn't going to yield a return that's worth doing a process improvement program against. So you kind of pull together a team of stakeholders from all disciplines of the organization at all levels. And when you create this team, then they're going to go off and do a bunch of brainstorming and determine, is this a process worth improving? And what's the return on that process going to be versus the effort that has to go into making that improvement? And then the third tip is analyze what is affecting performance in the business. So if we're trying to improve process, then what is negatively affecting that, or just affecting that in some way? If it's positively affecting it, then how can we replicate that even farther and get more return out of that positive effect? So we just want to see what affects processes, so sub-process, if we're looking at improving a process, that contribute to that. And then the fourth one is challenge that process. See where you can poke holes in it, and find out, do a lot of what ifs scenarios, that if something were to change, what would we be able to do to continue to keep that process running? And then lastly, it is ultimately important, so important for the management to champion it. So they're going to be sponsors of this team from the very beginning. And then as they continue to sponsor that and champion it, they'll back it up by either really showing by example, so performing those process improvement techniques themselves, but also just as importantly, deploying tech policy and developing a culture that supports this process improvement. So there's a lot of times where you'll see conflict between the goal of the process improvement and the policies and culture of the organization. So the goal here is to reduce some of these processes, but the culture of the organization, or of the executives, is to enforce as many policies as possible, because that helps with consistency. I mean, there's a true statement there, but how far can you go with that? So I use the terminology also as that when you're deploying a process improvement program, that you're really just putting together a canvas for the organization to be creative with, but they have to stick within that canvas so that you're providing them the medium in which to be creative, but just still within those guardrails that you need. So it's not strict policy enforcement. It's creating guardrails for people to be able to, um, provide solutions to the organization themselves. And that helps people, this team, and then the rest of the organization, that helps them adopt it. It helps them own it. Um, and so those are the 5 steps to, successfully deploying Six Sigma and AV. And then if we go into it a little bit farther with tip 1, so the statement here, this quote by the Dalai Lama was, any genuine change, or what I say is significant change, comes from within, because first the individual, then they can attempt to make a significant contribution to humanity. So you have to digest it internally before you can show it externally. So that means that if you're going to provide a product or a service to an organization, then you have to adopt that mentality internally first. So we have a problem when in audiovisual a lot of the time. I'm not saying anybody here does that, because I'm looking through and seeing a lot of people that I know that wouldn't do this, but we have this mentality, or not mentality, but a mistake that we make where we have the shoemaker's kids go barefoot, where if we look at an organization's quality of AV in their organization, we would see that this is not true, that they're not, embracing the change themselves that they want to deliver to their customers. And so that's kind of from the get-go, we haven't truly decided to improve because we're not even willing to have that for ourselves. So this is very helpful for people to kind of again embrace that change. So if you also have ultimately would end up creating a really good showcase, a demo center, because your organization embraces the perfection that you're looking to deliver to your customers. Again, I use that word perfection as a goal, not a true expectation. So if we're looking at making that decision to change, there's some steps that we should take. First, you have to understand the change that you're trying to deploy, and have a change plan, and then implement that plan, and always constantly communicate that plan and the status of that plan, and where we need to continue to make adjustments to the plan and all that stuff. So as we're implementing change, when you provide these things, a clear understanding what the plan is, and everybody knows that plan, and actually you start to begin to get that low-hanging fruit. You develop that or implement that plan to where it's delivering early in the process, and like I said, continually communicate, then you end up with a passion and purpose. This is that value, mission, and vision statements that a lot of people use, is when the organization develops it, when they say what they believe in as their vision, and then what they believe in as far as how they behave, and then they also say what we want to deliver to our customers. That vision, mission, and values ultimately do create this passion and purpose at all levels. And so when we tell everybody what we're going to be doing, and then we have them also provide some information as to what we're doing, let them contribute. So the second step, or actually the third step, which is, oh, sorry, geez, come on, go back. So the third step is analyzing, and this is probably the biggest undertaking part of Six Sigma. So I talk about the most important parts, taking it in small chunks and communicating and all that stuff. But this is the one that takes the most effort, because as you select what you're going to do, this contributes to that in a big way. You should, data-driven decision making and all that, really, it's important that the data that you gather is comprehensive, complete, all of those things. So the statement here, Sherlock Holmes says data, data, data. I can't make bricks without clay. So we need that basis of information. We need that data in order to build what it is that we want to build as far as delivering process improvement or a change. So one of the things that we promised in the description of this course was a case study. So I did a case study with a company where I consulted with them on process improvement, and it spanned over 25 weeks. And when those 25 weeks, so the study, I mean, I wasn't there for 25 weeks, but we took 25 weeks worth of data. And then it also, there's a lot of observation into the processes because you want to see where people walk around, where they're spending idle time between tasks in a process, things like that. So really this part of the presentation, we're going to delve into a lot of this data. And I don't want you to kind of, you know, analyze this data. What I want you to do is kind of get an idea of the framework that you could build to gather data for a process that you want to improve. And so this is just one example, and I'll show you a lot of data, but it's not data that will necessarily apply to your organization. But the way this is put together, you'll see that it's unique, that you won't repeat the process of this exact data gathering for any other project. You want to tailor the data gathering to the project, not to the outcomes that you want, but towards the data that you're going to need to make a decision on what to improve. So here we did 25 weeks of study, and then we also watched and observed and gathered information on 25 employees, whether they had certifications in education or not, whether they are continuing training, whether it's continuous. And we looked at 5 market segments. So house of worship, corporate, like that. And I'll tell you all those markets as we look at the data, and then 9 system types. So was it audio, was it distributed audio? Was it program audio? Was it, those types of things. So the 9 different system types that were also deployed. What we looked at, what our goal to find out was how long it takes to complete a change order. So the process that we determined was bogging the organization down, or somewhere that could be improved that would positively impact the organization, was improving the change order process. 1 was reduce the number of change orders. 2 was making the process more efficient if you did have to process a change order. And then so again, that was bringing down the quantity of change orders or the length of time, and comparing that to the total number of projects. What percentage of projects are resulting in a change order, and where do those change orders come from? Is it a particular segment? Is it a particular type of system? Is it a particular group of employees? So we looked at all of these things and gathered all this data about these things. So we set ourselves a data gathering plan, and this is not the plan, this is one for a restaurant, but we put together a plan as to what we wanted to measure, how we're going to get that data, and what the organization sees as that particular item that we need to measure, how they see it, how do they define it. One example I'll give you is in another case where I was helping an organization or consulting, they were trying to determine how to improve customer service. And one of the ways that they defined their customer service was the amount of time that they were able to resolve a problem on the phone. Now remember, we're trying to improve quality as well as efficiencies. And what we found was that the satisfaction factor was not how quickly I got off the phone with somebody. It was how well they answered the questions and how much information they provided me to where I would consider them a trusted advisor, somebody who I could implement their ideas. And then how are we going to sample that information? So again, this was kind of eye-opening in that particular case because their goal was to get off the phone real quick. And we found that in the samples, by talking to customers and listening in the calls, and then ultimately running satisfaction surveys afterwards, that the satisfaction level was actually lower the quicker they got off the call. And so that was a process that we needed to change. But we actually thought at the beginning that we were going to try and shorten that time through a process improvement, and then we realized that not only let's go to the Six Sigma side, we're trying to improve quality as well. And so we kind of had to readjust who were doing these tasks and how are they doing them and how can we improve it. So we gather the information in the current state. So I gave you some hints as to what the ultimate end state was on that particular subject. But here we're only gathering information on the current state. Then part of that data collection plan is also looking at your sources. So this is not a plug for D-Tools, but what it is telling you that we used a very comprehensive SQL database to gather the information, the historical data, as well as that was part of the solution moving forward, was this database wasn't being used to its fullest extent and capturing the information that we needed, all the information that we needed. So we also had to use, we used their D-Tools deployment, but we also used their QuickBooks deployment and some other things that were just in the records of projects, which we had to pull a lot out of just an Excel, a bunch of Excel spreadsheets. And then, but we also started to look at, after putting a team together, then we had that team brainstorm. And one of the techniques for brainstorm is the Ishikawa diagram, which is also known as a fishbone diagram or a cause, a root cause analysis. And what we found was in this brainstorming part, the things that contribute to change orders. So people, their level of experience and certification is where that came from earlier as to why we wanted, what we wanted to analyze, because those people and their experience were contributing to change orders. Now, we don't know yet how much, but we're just putting together in this way of facilitating a discussion amongst all the stakeholders of what you believe is contributing to the process that you're looking to improve. So in this case, it could have had to do with the market and the process phases. So, are you taking an RFI and moving it through a project manager and having the project manager do a impact analysis and all those kind of things? So that was the process phases. And then our change orders being affected strictly by the project volume, how many projects we do per employee and per market segment. That's a typo there. So it should be per employee and per market segment. How many projects do we do that ultimately generate change orders? And the end goal was to analyze the volume, how many we do, and the cost impact that it has on the organization. So if we gather that data and then the causes for that, we'd have a good idea of what areas we need to improve, or if we need to improve. So that was the big determination. And we gathered a group of people and commissioned a team and gave them a charter. And they, after that, they actually helped develop the charter. So I said, we didn't give them a charter. We actually commissioned them to develop a charter based on this. So the next thing that they did was start building that charter based on information that they gathered. So I'm going to very quickly talk about coefficients. And the only reason why I talk about this is because the information that we gathered, we wanted to know that this information correlates, and how does it correlate? Like what is, because it's really hard to determine correlation versus causation. And so in this case, the closer you can align your correlation coefficient, the idea that you can see that things change in a bigger way based on a subject matter, in this case, experience. How much change was affected? How far away from the median did we go based on someone's experience? And then so on with systems and projects and how far. So these are the top ones that I sorted out for you here in that particular study that we did that shows, one of the biggest correlations was the number of projects that we did. We are actually able to directly correlate. And again, there's still always going to be the question between correlation and causation. But what we were able to see is that there is a direct correlation of the number of projects that an organization does and the percentage of projects that require change orders, not just volume, because that's obvious that when you increase the number of projects, you're going to increase the volume of your change orders. But what we found was a direct correlation between a higher percentage when the projects went up, when the number of projects. So the workload got harder, or the workload at least hit the organization more. I won't say harder, but so as you see, the two major things that kind of contributed to the correlation, or to the problem, if you will, or the process that we want to fix, was systems and projects. So if we go back a little bit and look, the number of years experience. So we saw a direct correlation here by saying that the people who had more years experience had a lower percentage, considerably noticeable lower percentage in the amount of change orders that they processed versus the amount of change orders that somebody with a shorter period of time processed, as far as experience in the industry. So that was one portion that we looked at. And then another one, and by the way, it's just so you get an idea, because again, this isn't the concept behind this is to show you the type of data that you could build up. So in this case, we looked at, I'm going to jump over to the employee side. So we looked at these 25 employees, and the 25 employees here represent now X number of change orders and then their years of experience, and then all of these other things. So we started correlating this data using the X and Y method, so that we could actually create a coefficient line. This is this is a function within Excel. You don't have to have the knowledge of what this is actually doing, really. What you can do is you build the measurement that you want to take, the experience, and then a percentage. So in this case, it was the number of change orders as a percentage of the total number of change orders that were processed, and projects that were actually built. So the total projects, and just correlate that. So we had a percentage of, so a ratio of how many change orders were processed by these individuals, and the direct correlation to their experience. So you just take those two columns and create a scatter chart. That was it. And then the scatter chart has an option to create the coefficient line. I know that was a lot of information, but the end of that was you create your data the way you can analyze it. And there's a lot of tools that are available to you that you didn't know. You may not have known that feature is part of that system. So the research, there's a little bit of research in that, how we're going to gather that data. I think I showed that slide that you have to have a data gathering plan. So in that plan, we decided we needed the ratio of experience over the number of years experience. So we did the same thing with the ratio by certification. So it's a digital decision. You either have the certification or you don't. And in this case, the people who had the certification had a considerably lower, actually this is reverse, it's 63% for the people who had the certification versus the people who didn't. And that brought their number of change orders down based on the fact that they were theoretically more knowledgeable in the industry because they were certified. So, a little plug for AVIXA is, getting these CTS, CTSI, CTSD, or whatever the applicable certification is, or working towards it. And there's many certs, or the badges that you can get, so you can work on install, but work your way towards a certification. So micro-credentialing, those kind of things contribute towards this reduction in this organization. So when we studied this organization, it helped, or it could have. At least we saw the direct correlation. Then the next one we studied was the number of projects over time. So we saw that as actually that correlation is reversed, that the more projects that they were able to do, the more efficient they became. So they were actually able to reduce the number. The theory on that was, just so you're aware of that, the theory on that was that the busier they got, the more they focused on the doing it right the first time, because there was no time to go back and correct an error. And then the other ratio that we looked at, again, was the number of systems by market. So we saw that the highest percentage of change orders came from the corporate market. And then we continued, on the rest of the way. And the rest of them were pretty much equal. So we kind of said, okay, we need to focus in on the corporate market as to what we're doing that is causing change orders in that market and not other markets. I'll just share now that we found that in the broadcast arena and in the education and house of worship and media and entertainment, those organizations had a lot of knowledge so the higher the knowledge of the customer, resulted in less change orders because they were able to relay their desires and what the end system should look like better than the corporate customers. So I'm kind of giving you the end of the story, the punchline beforehand, but this is ultimately what we learned from some of this data. Was now we go out and go, trying to remember the term that's used in Six Sigma, but it's a Japanese term that goes to, you go to the source. And in this case, when we went to the source, we asked the customers information about their organizations in these markets, and we also looked at industry data and found that these people working in those organizations had a higher knowledge level. And so then the change by market segment just represented in another way. And then the projects per employee. So we also found that the ratio went down as by the when a employee processed more projects. So the actual percentage. So that kind of yields back to the experience level as well as the focus on quality when they're a little bit more busy, when they have more time. It's kind of not intuitive that would have been the case. I would have never come up with the busier you are, the less change orders you're going to get in a percentage. But that was actually the case with this organization. And then change order type was a big one that I didn't put on that initial slide, but we found that ads were the biggest change order type. So removing items were a little bit less, and then substituting items were even less. So it was either a digital decision. We either put the right products in or we put the wrong products in. And so we had to add things when we didn't put the right products in, or we put too many products in and we had to remove them. Some of these change orders we had determined were based on the wrong use of the term, but on the term of value engineering. So I could go on a whole diatribe about value engineering, because value engineering is not removing products, but that's the term we used here. Value engineering is increasing the functionality through engineering, and then if that results in the reduction of product because you're making the system more efficient, then fine. But I hate the term value engineering when it's used to remove products, but it is what it is. That's what people refer to it as. So the next thing was by the phase of the project. So are we in the information gathering phase, the needs analysis phase? Are we in, and where are the change orders generated? Now, obviously, most of the change orders are going to be generated at install, but we did want to track the quality of the work here as well, and how many resources were applied to that, just to see if the more people you put on something, are they more efficient or make less errors. But we found that wasn't necessarily the case. Even if there were more change orders, it could have been, and we would go back to the fishbone diagram and do the root cause analysis and find out why this is 8%. Well, when we did the root cause analysis, we actually found that it was because of the lack of the full scope of work, or a clearly written full scope that's understood and agreed to by the customer. So that was a big thing that we needed to fix. Again, I'm kind of telling you the punchline before the end of the story, but so what we also want to look at is how much these change orders are costing us. And really the only reason why we wanted to do that was to determine, is this a project worth working at? Now, $152,000 over a period of 25 weeks of loss may not seem like a lot to some people. In 614 different projects, then is this really worth going after? But understand that this is the number we could prove. There's probably a lot more to the change orders that we kind of made the assumption that, and again, there's a lot of gut feel in this once you do the analysis, but it can be backed by data at least. And it did kind of tell us that, yeah, there is a clearly defined loss in the projects, because what happens is ultimately people were selling the projects, and I didn't quite illustrate that here other than the average margin and the margin loss, that they would end up selling the change orders at a much lower margin than the original project was sold. So ultimately, this profit loss is money on the table was the concept behind this. Is they were quoting change orders as kind of a break fix, and there had to be a lot of goodwill here. So a lot of these um, weren't the result of quoting it at a lower price, but they were the result of trying to make sure that the customer stayed happy in kind of eating some crow by giving them something that we may have forgot to put in the project. So then the idea was, once we have gathered all that data, let's challenge the process. Tip number 4. So what can we do to improve? So where can I eliminate setup errors, or where can I decrease setup time? So this would be, decrease the time in processing a change order. Where can I simplify that process? Where can I increase safety? So we still want to stick with that quality thing and the employee happiness level, if you will, or satisfaction level of the employees. Where can we lower costs? Where can we lower the skill requirements? So that we want to do one of two things, or both. Is one, bring our people up to a level where they're performing at a higher level. So we want to increase their productivity and improve their attitudes by providing training and certifications. But also, where can we lower the skill requirements so that the entry point and the work levels matches the workforce. So ultimately, you analyze the current state of how the process works. So in this case, this is where we came up with some of these processes percentages that we also used back here, was by doing what's referred to as a value stream mapping. And we determine the lengths of time and resources that go into stages in the project. So in this case, a request for information, or ultimately ends up generating a change order. So we have the project manager submitting a change order, and there's a study whether it's done by the project manager or engineering. So that's kind of a little gray area there. And then that change order is worked on by engineering, and then it's passed off to ops for any ordering that needs to happen or correction that needs to happen as far as logistics and purchasing and those types of things, accounting. And then we propose that change to the customer. Here's what it's going to take, and this is at some point could be where we do see an increase in the number of change orders, but we definitely see an increase in the number of change orders during the staging phase. So once we start to build a rack, we find issues. I'm giving you the example, that's not necessarily the case, but maybe if you are assembling equipment and even sub-assemblies or subsystems, like I said, a rack, you'll find, in this case, we found that there were some items missing. And then of course, during install, we may find that some items missing or functionality was missing. And so the expectation was there by the customer at sign off, and they're like, wait a minute, where's this kind of thing? The other effects that we didn't study that we could have added, again, I'm trying to give you ideas for how you would study and get the information to do your own change order or your own process improvement change order. So what we found was here that there was a processing time of 2 hours and 2.66 hours total. And if we looked at the total number of projects and the yield, so ultimately, because we had to issue this number of change orders, there was a yield of 70%, and the total tack time, so this is actual processing time versus time that we're spending actually doing this process. And then again, the ratio of change orders per job. But so we use this analysis to determine where we want to try and make corrections to improve the process, mostly to improve the quality. So we found that here's where we're being bogged down, where most of our phase during the phase where most of those errors are coming from. How do we correct that? And that's when we did that, like I said, the root cause analysis, and we actually determined that back here is where it was happening. When we scoped out the job, then we found out that there was the issues. So ultimately what we learned was again, and I mentioned this in the last presentation, was the importance of the voice of the customer. You almost want the customer to be part of your project planning team to the point of where they're constantly iterating what they need. Now, there's going to be a sign off at some point for a scope, otherwise you can't make a estimate for them and actually quote them a price. But during the development, during the needs analysis, that's what we found was the need for the customer to have a very large contribution, and it was the user that that taught us that. Um, and then we want to champion that, and it's true influence. So one of the biggest things that, and these are nice words for the influence part, but I have another one that I use. I love these kind of mnemonics, if you will, or acronyms. Of course, this one makes a word, so it's influence, and then the integrity, nurturing, all that stuff. I'll let you read through that. But the other one that I use is team, and that's trust, empower, accolades, and mentorship. Those kind of things are what's going to help with the contribution towards a Lean Six Sigma deployment. And then so we are providing. This is a way to help it with the culture, is the guidance, mentoring, coaching, but understand that the individuals in the team, their values and principles, their beliefs, these things actually, and including their moral compass, actually are also what contributes to the culture of the entire organization. A lot of people put the onus solely on the leaders of the organization, but understand it's how your customers perceive you. And so when your customers perceive you one way, it's often because of the people they directly interface with. So that was one of the things that we did, was we determined who has certifications based on customer facing people. And we learned that was important because they would become higher level of trusted advisors. So when you're building this team of people, the trusted, empowered, accoladed, and mentored. So we want to recognize people publicly for what they did. That's the accolade part, for what they're doing and what they're contributing. People find more satisfaction in their job. Over pay, they actually find more satisfaction in the contribution level that they're making to the organization. They're happiest when their contributions are recognized. So now we decided we do have to implement the change. So part of the Six Sigma process was to go through all of these things and then decide whether you want to implement the change. In this case, we did see that there was a need to improve the change order process, or to reduce the number of change orders. So ultimately, what the change that we determined what needed to be made, so we kind of do these modeling of what will make an impact where. And so the biggest one we kind of determined was standardization. So we needed to standardize scope gathering. So everybody was doing the needs analysis the same and gathering all the information possible. So that's where I developed the pre-sales needs analysis that you'll see is available through a download at the end of this program. So I give you a lot of Six Sigma resources, and one of them was the scope that we built for this organization. Again, your change is going to be different, but knowing that standardization was one of the things that really helped. So we deployed some of AVIXA's standards as far as the shop pre-work. So built the rack building standard, the audio uniformity standard. So we designed according to the audio uniformity standard. We implemented those types of standards to the organization. And then one of the other things that we also did was add systems and support. So they were using D-Tool systems integrator, but what we learned was that there was a lot of things that D-Tools could contribute to the organization that made them a lot more streamlined and provided them real-time data of corrections, because it's continuous process improvement, corrections that they needed to make. A NetSuite was another tool that we ended up deploying beyond what they were using was Excel spreadsheets and QuickBooks. NetSuite gave them the ability to follow that process through its entire, from beginning to end, and have the data available to see where the process was improved. I'll make one blanket statement and let you know that when there's something called the Hawthorne effect. I'm sure many of you know way more about it than I do from the education side, but The Hawthorne effect states that anything studied changes its behavior. So when we think about change and process improvement, just because we put this system out in place caused an effect that was a positive effect on the organization where people were performing better because they knew they were being studied. I mean, even if we didn't deploy the right change process or the right improvements, it improved because we made an effort to improve it, if that makes any sense. And then we looked at training, so providing training, and we focused that training on the market segments because remember, we did catch the data that said that the market segments were contributing. So we wanted to learn more about the corporate customer and why it is that the changes we're generating here. And then we moved forward to actually finding the customer journey, like learning. What we ended up providing training on here and learning about was the different people in the buying process. So we really put some focus in on the people who have power to buy. And then we put some additional training and support behind the influencers that will ultimately help make the decision by whispering, if you will, into the decision maker's ear, and increased our reach to those people by learning their customer journey. Where is it that they jump into the buying process? And then we also looked, when we're looking at those segments, we looked at people with power, people of influence, and people of preference. There's some people that we had to learn about, that we needed to learn how to address the fact that they just like certain brands, or that they have other companies that they like working with just by the company name or things like that. So we learned those trends and we trained on those trends, and the full customer journey. And then we also looked at the certification. So we provided now, can you hear me now? Check one. All right, back again. Yep. All right. Yeah, this happened last time too. Is when the computer. Also, you will hear my computer revving up right now. The fan is blasting. All right. So we created a teaming structure where we kind of put some experienced people with non-experienced people, and kind of built these teams that consistently work together. And then we also established a position or an organization with that their job was internal project management. So to make sure that a project moved from phase to phase, we have excellent project managers in our industry who provide our customer with excellent service. We weren't doing that for ourselves. So what we weren't doing was managing the process internally like it's a project. I mean, obviously it is a project, but we weren't managing it as far as handoff from project management over to engineering. There was somebody else whose job it was to make sure that happened. We also called them an expediter, and there's a typical position in that in a lot of organizations called the expediter, and their job is to make sure that something moves through the process in an efficient manner, and then to make sure that we communicated the plan and the metrics on a constant basis. A lot of people put dashboards up where everybody can see it of how the organization is performing. That's the idea behind that, to communicate the plan and the performance level. A lot of people just don't know how they're doing, and they need that feedback. So the next thing, and lastly, was what was the impact that these changes had on the organization. So we brought down that tack time. We increased the number of projects. So yeah, maybe it got busier and it was seasonal, but we were able to capture that. We did. I mean, we just ended up allowing for more bandwidth for the team so that they could do more projects. That's one of the theories behind that. They were much more efficient because their change orders went down considerably, and so their total time went down, as well as again, since the total number of change orders went down, so did the ratio. So what did that mean to the organization? So what that meant was this difference between the 614 and 700 brought in $1 million extra of profit. So there behind that was 3 million, if you will, of actual revenue, and we brought in over $1 million in extra profit based on those projects and the efficiency of those projects. So we weren't doing the same number of change orders on those projects that we were doing on these. So these brought in a higher margin level to achieve this. And then just the contribution on margin alone, based on the fact that we were more efficient, was over 100,000. That may not seem like much, but to some organizations, that percentage, that 26% or the 12% that we brought it up, I can't think of any organization that would give up 12% of their business, much less the idea of being able to bring this in 25 weeks from the bottom line. All you had to do was change your processes to get more out of the bottom line. So really, ultimately, it was about 1.5 million in contribution over 2 years, but really the time from implementation to the time of measuring this was really only the 25 weeks. So the change was being implemented during, but we were able to see the consistent contribution after 2 years. So there were some hiccups, by the way, that people went back to old habits and things like that, and we had to continue to go through the continuous improvement. So that's just a kind of a basic case study on process improvement, Lean Six Sigma, and how it was deployed in AV and the yield and all that stuff. Hopefully this gave you enough information to kind of get creative on and do it yourself, and deploy a system, have a team work on it. And if you do choose to go down the Lean Six Sigma path, it would help to have a Lean Six Sigma black belt come to your organization and get the systems going, and then you'll have green belts in your organization to manage the projects. But to start that discipline, there's master black belts and black belts that can help you get that going. But again, anything studied changes its behavior. So just deploying some change based on the studies that you do and learning where those changes need to happen, including the information from the organization, from every level, as well as the customer, then you ultimately see a change. So if you go to Six Sigma Max, and that's a bit.ly link, so just go to https :// bit.ly, Six Sigma Max. Then a bunch of the tools that I showed you here for analyzing, plus just definitions on Six Sigma and all that stuff, is here at this site. And it is also put in the chat area, so I can move on to the next slide. And again, if you look for parts 1 and parts 2 on AVIXA's site, the link was provided earlier in the chat. So if you go up the chat, you can find that link, as well as it's up here right now. But the links available to you if you needed those first two. They provide a little bit of information on the structure behind Lean Six Sigma. And then this is the actual case study on the deployment. So I'm Max Kopshow with D-Tools, and thank you very much for your time today. And I really appreciate the number of people. It's incredible the number of people we had here. And I appreciate your time and your contributions. If you have any questions, now is the time. And of course, you could have asked any time during the presentation, but if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And then I'll turn it back over to Allie.
Great. Thanks, Max. Thanks, everyone, for joining us on today's third part of the three-part series on Lean Six Sigma and AV. We hope you've enjoyed this series, and you can find the recordings as well as the previous recordings of part 1 and 2 at avixa.org/insight/webinars. Also, your 1RU credit will be applied to your transcripts within about 5 to 7 business days. And if you have any trouble with that, contact webinars@avixa.org. And again, thank you, Max. This has been such a wonderful series, and thank you for helping us understand and apply Lean Six Sigma to the AV industry.
You're welcome. And it's Katie, by the way. I'm sorry. I just caught myself saying another name.
No worries.
Well, thank you all.
Wonderful. Thank you all.